The idea seems foreign, almost perilous to be cut off from the warmth of others in a world where cold is the great adversary and isolation whispers of death. Even now, in this half-minus waking state, you hear the household around you, a muffled cough in the dark, the scuffle of a dog drawing nearer to the fading hearth, the quiet sounds of digestion and breath from the cattle and goats in their pen. Privacy is a luxury you do not know. An ocean that would seem bizarre if someone from a distant future tried to describe it. Your entire life unfolds before others' birth, sickness, love, quarrel, prayer, death. The longhouse contains your world. Its timber walls are all that stand between your kin and the vast, indifferent cold of the Nordic winter. The structure is a feat of shared living, though you'd never call it that. Curved wooden frames rise from the ground, supporting walls of planks and a roof of turf and bark. The whole building shifts and settles with the seasons, with swelling and shrinking, so it seems almost alive, groaning like a great ship run aground. Wind finds cracks in the planking, bringing the scent of snow and pine, a sharp chill that makes you nestle deeper into the furs. Outside, winter holds the world in its grip. Snow lies deep over the fields, turning known landscapes into strange, white plains broken only by dark forest and distant gray mountains. If you live near the coast, the fjord is a sheet of dark, unfrozen water, so cold it draws the warmth from your bones. Inland, rivers are solid highways of ice, silent until spring brings the first groaning crack. These are the months when daylight is a brief, precious visitor. The sun, when it appears, traces a shallower glow in the southern sky, offering light but little heat. Shadows lie long. Even at midday, the world exists in a perpetual twilight, a blue-minus-gray glow that never truly becomes day and never fully darkens into night. Your body, like all bodies here, has learned this strange rhythm, though it never feels entirely natural. Sleep in these months is both simpler and more complex. Simpler because the darkness seems to invite it, because there is less work when fields are frozen and boats are ashore, because the cold makes you crave the burrow of warmth and stillness. More complex because the nights can feel endlessly long, because bodies used to labor grow restless with idleness, because the dark can seem as if it will never lift. But in summer is a different trial. The sun barely dips below the horizon, flooding the world with a pale gold light at hours meant for darkness. Sleep becomes fugitive when brightness presses on your closed eyelids, when birds sing at midnight, when the air itself seems charged with wake-up signals. The longhouse has no shutters to block this relentless glow. So you adapt. You sleep when exhaustion commands it. You rise now because the day's labor begins, regardless of how rested you feel. Your joints announce themselves with a chorus of small pains, the legacy of a life of ceaseless physical work. Your hands, seen in the faint firelight, are rough and calloused, scarred by countless small cuts and burns, nails broken and edged with a dirt that never fully washes away. Moving carefully so as not to wake the others, you go to the hearth. The fire has burned down to a bed of coals. Your first task is to coax it back to life. You at kindling, blowing gently, watching small flames rise and lick the air. Fire is life in this cold place. It cooks, it warms, it gives light, it wards off predators. To let it die entirely would be a grave failure. Someone must always tend it, banking it at night, reviving it each morning. As the fire strengthens, others begin to stir. The household awakens in waves, a slow emergence rather than a sudden change. Children blink awake and stumble toward the warmth, hair tousled from sleep. Your spouse rises and starts the morning chores, checking supplies, warming water, preparing the first meal. This is the rhythm of your days, unchanging, unending, as reliable as the turning seasons. The work awaiting you is physical and relentless. If you are a man, you might haul timber from the forest today, heavy logs making your shoulders ache and your hands raw. Or you might fish, standing for hours in a small boat, cold spray soaking your woolens, fingers growing numb as you draw in nets. Or you will work the farm tending animals, mending fences, cutting peat for fuel, labor so constant your body moves almost without thought. If you are a woman, your day is no less demanding. Wool to card and spin, the spindlest eddy companion. Cloth to weave on the upright loom against the wall, arms reaching up and pulling down 1,000 times until your shoulders burn. Butter to churn, milk to process, herbs to dry, food to prepare over the smoky fire. And always, always children to tend, feeding them, teaching them, guarding them from 100 dangers in a world without modern safeguards. The food you live on is plain, often monotonous. Salted fish, preserved from summer catches, forms the core of many meals. Thick barley porridge is another staple, sometimes enriched with a little milk or the rare treasure of honey. Root vegetables, when they are to be had, turnips, onions, their earthy taste a welcome change. Occasional hard, sharp cheese meat when an animal can be spared, game when the hunt is good, but never in the abundance later times will know. This diet touches your sleep in ways you don't name. The heavy salt leaves you always thirsty, sometimes waking at night for a drink of water from a wooden cup. The barley, though filling, can sit heavily in your stomach as you lie down. The lack of variety leaves your body wanting, leading to a low unwellness you accept as the normal human condition. By midday in winter, the brief twilight that passes for day is already fading. You've worked for hours, your body moving through familiar motions, your mind often wandering. There is no clock to mark the time, no schedule beyond the natural rhythms of light and dark, hunger and fullness, weariness and rest. Social order shapes every part of your life, including where and how you sleep. If you are more fortunate talent owner or skilled in a valued trade, your space in the longhouse might be a little larger, your furs a bit thicker, your share of food slightly greater. But even the wealthiest farmer is not so far removed from the poorest laborer. You all share the same smoke, the same cold, the same essential struggle against a harsh land. Family is everything here. Your place in the social web is defined by kinship, who your father was, who your brothers are, what family your spouse comes from. These ties bring both obligation and support. If your cousin's farm fails, you are expected to help. If your brother calls for aid, you must answer. And when trouble finds you, these same networks that can provide your only safety net. Children are valued but not pampered. They are expected to contribute as soon as they are able, learning by watching and doing. A child of 5 might help feed chickens, an 8-year-old begins to learn spinning, a 12-year-old is trusted with more complex tasks. This early start in responsibility makes childhood brief, but it also means that by the time they are grown, young people have the skills needed to survive. Marriage is as much a practical matter as a romantic one. Alliances between families, the joining of resources, the continuation of bloodlines, these shape which unions are made. But this does not mean affection is absent. In the close quarters of the longhouse, where lives are lived in constant proximity, a genuine fondness often grows between spouses. You see your partner in every state, exhausted, ill, afraid, joyful. Through this complete knowing, an intimacy emerges that may run deeper than passion alone. As evening comes, the kind of work changes. The heaviest labor is done, and attention turns to the tasks that maintain the household. Tools need repair, a broken axe handle replaced, a torn net mended, a knife sharpened on a wet stone with long, patient strokes. Women continue their textile work by firelight, the spindle turning, fingers moving with practiced ease even in the dimmest. Death is also the time for stories. The spoken tradition is strong in your culture. Tales of gods and heroes, accounts of ancestors' deeds, sagas that weave history and legend until they are inseparable. An elder might begin to speak, voice rising and falling in a practiced rhythm, and everyone pauses in their work to listen. These stories serve many purposes. They entertain during the long, dark evenings. They pass on the values of your culture. They preserve history. And importantly, they create a shared world of meaning that binds the community together. The gods are ever present in your understanding of the world. Thor with his hammer, protecting humankind from giants and chaos. Odin the All-Father, god of wisdom, war, and poetry, who gave an eye for knowledge. Freya, of love and fertility, whose favor might mean good harvests and healthy children. These are not distant, abstract deities, but intimate presences who take an interest in human affairs. You make small offerings, a bit of food left out, a prayer whispered before a journey, an amulet worn for protection. As the household prepares for sleep, a series of small rituals unfolds. Someone must secure the door, a simple wooden barrier that marks the boundary between the ordered world inside and the wild dark beyond. The fire must be carefully banked in a fuel to keep coals alive through the night, but not so much it becomes a danger. Someone checks on the animals, ensuring they are settled, for a restless cow might kick and cause harm in the dark. You arrange your bedding, shaking out the straw to spread it more evenly, pulling the furs up within easy reach. The sleeping platform, really just a raised section of floor along the wall, is shared by your immediate family. There is barely room for all, so you sleep close, bodies touching, breath mingling. In winter, this closeness is survival. Hard body heat might mean the difference between waking and not. Around your neck, you wear an amulet, a small hammer of Thor carved from bone. It has been blessed by a god a chieftain minus priest who knows the proper words and rites. You do not think of it as magical in the way a later age might, but as a link to divine protection, a physical reminder you are not alone in the dark. Before lying down, you touch it briefly, a habit so ingrained you barely notice. A small prayer for safe sleep and good dreams. The children settle first, their young bodies quick to yield to exhaustion after a day of activity. They curl together like a litter of pups, small hands clutching fur, faces peaceful in the firelight. You watch them, feeling the complex mix of emotions parenthood brings: love certainly, but also a fierce protective anxiety. For you know how fragile life is, how quickly illness or accident can take the young. Your spouse settles beside you, and you exchange a few quiet words, thoughts about tomorrow's tasks, a small worry about dwindling stores, a moment of shared humor over something a child said. These brief talks are intimate, not because of their content, but because of their context. The day's armor laid aside, voices soft in the dark, a rare moment when you are not working, but simply being together. Other household members find their sleeping places too. Perhaps an elderly parent, moving more slowly now, bones protesting each shift. Maybe a thrall, a slave taken in a raid or born into service, whose place is less comfortable nearer the door where cold drafts bite strongest. The household is a complex social unit, multiple generations and varied statuses all pressed into one shared space. As you lie down, your body begins its nightly catalog of aches. Your lower back troubles you tonight. Perhaps you lifted a log the wrong way. Your left shoulder, hurt years ago and never quite right, sends sharp little pains when you shift. Your hands throb dully, constant you swearing at joints that know no rest and no medicine beyond poultices of herbs, their effectiveness more hope than science. The sounds of the longhouse settling for the night create a kind of symphony. Snores begin almost at once, not just human snores, but the snuffling sleep-minus sounds of animals. A dog whimpers softly, chasing something in a dream. Goats shift in their pen, hooves scraping earth. Fire hisses and pops, as sap in the wood heats. Wind outside finds gaps in the walls, making the structure creak like a ship at anchor. Sleep does not come instantly for you. Your mind, granted rare freedom from physical demands, begins to turn over thoughts and worries, mostly practical concerns. Will the food stores last until spring? That storm you smelled on the air bring damage. Could tensions with a neighboring household turn dangerous? These are not idle fears, but constant companions in a world where the margin for survival is thin. Sometimes your thoughts turn to larger questions, the kind that surface in the space between waking and sleeping. What the gods truly want from humans? Where do people go when they die? Is it really the great halls the stories describe, or something else? Why does the world hold both great beauty and great cruelty? These questions have no answers, but asking them seems part of what makes us human. Memory visits you often in these drowsy moments. You remember your childhood decades past, though you are only in your 30s, a long life by the measures of your time. Images surface: your mother's hands carding wool, The particular smell of baking bread, the terror and thrill of your first time on a boat. You remember people now gone, taken by sickness, injury, or the simple wearing away of age. They feel near in the darkness, almost present, as if the boundary between the living and the dead grows thin at night. The dark itself has a quality later ages will not know. No street lamps, no neighbor's electric glow, no distant city lights staining the sky. When the fire burns low and clouds hide the stars, the darkness is absolute, thick, pressing presence that can disorient, even frighten. You have grown used to it, but it never becomes entirely comfortable. This blackness where anything might exist unseen. And things do exist in the dark, or so everyone believes. Spirits of the land Vetir, who must be appeased lest they cause mischief. The dead who did not go peacefully to their rest, who might walk if rites were not done right. Strange beings from the old tales, trolls, elves dwelling in that uncertain realm between myth and experience. You are not superstitious. Superstition implies a false belief. Rather, you live in a world where the supernatural is simply part of nature, where seen and unseen flow together. Fear is a companion in the night, but not a crushing one. It is more a watchfulness, an awareness that the world holds dangers you cannot fully control or predict. A raid might come in darkness, hostile neighbors or foreign raiders seeking food, animals, valuables, even people. Wild animals still roam these lands, bears, wolves dangerous when the moment is right. And always, the cold itself remains the most relentless hunter, waiting for any mistake that gives it entry. But you have defenses against fear. The presence of family all around you, their breathing and warmth, a constant reassurance. The walls of the longhouse, solid and strong, built with skill and kept with care. The rituals and prayers that create a sense of order, of human will imposed on chaos. As your body temperature dips in the move toward sleep, you pull the furs higher, tucking them about your chin. The wool blankets beneath have drunken the smoke smell so deeply you notice it only after being away. But turning to bed after a day working in clean air, you catch the scent against wrong, acrid, but also familiar, even comforting. It is the smell of home and safety. Your breathing begins to slow and deepen. Thoughts that tumble through your mind grow less distinct, more dreamlike. An image surfaces: the fjord at sunrise, water like glass, mountains mirrored perfectly. Then another: your father's face, long gone but suddenly vivid. Then something that makes no sense, a fragment of dream beginning to weave itself while you are still partly conscious. The shift into true sleep is gradual, with no clear boundary. You don't notice when the sounds of the longhouse become part of your dreams, when the ache in your back becomes a memory of climbing a steep hill, when the warmth of the furs becomes summer sunshine. You slip from one state to another as naturally as a boat drifting from shore, borne on currents you do not control or resist. Your sleep, when it fully claims you, is profound. This is not the light, fitful sleep of someone in comfort and security, whose greatest nighttime challenge is finding the right temperature under a down comforter. Yours is the deep unconsciousness of true exhaustion, the body's absolute demand for restoration after hours of relentless physical labor. The cold, paradoxically, deepens your sleep as your body cools in response to the air, the fire now mere embers offering little heat. Your metabolism slows, heart rate decreases, breathing becomes shallow and even. Brain activity shifts into patterns that foster the deepest stages of rest. The thick layers of fur and wool create a pocket of warmth around your body, a microclimate. Your system works gently to maintain a ask that promotes sleep rather than disturbs it. The physical tiredness is total. Every muscle has been used to the legs from walking and standing, back from lifting and bending, arms from hauling and carrying, hands from gripping tools. This all minus over weariness brings a pleasant heaviness, a sense of your body sinking into the bedding, becoming part of it. There is no energy left for restlessness, no reserve for tossing and turning. You sleep as the dead are said to sleep, motionless and deep. But there is more to it than exhaustion and cold. Social closeness plays a crucial role, though you didn't ever put it in those terms. The presence of family all around, their familiar sounds and scents, creates a psychological sense of safety that permits truly depressed. You are not alone against the world. You are woven into a protective web of kinship. Some ancient part of your brain, the part that evolved when humans first became human, recognizes this arrangement and signals safety permission to let go completely into unconsciousness. The predictable rhythm of days also helps. Your body knows what to expect: hard work followed by rest, activity followed by stillness. There is no fatigue from decision-minus making, no lying awake wondering what tomorrow will bring, because tomorrow will be much like today. This certainty, while it might seem limiting, actually brings a kind of peace. You know your role, your place, your duties. In the dark, you can release all that and simply be. Dreams come, as they always do, that you won't remember most upon waking. Some are mundane replays of the day's labor, your mind processing the experiences of waking life. Others are strange and symbolic, vivid images that seem meaningful in sleep but dissolve like mist in morning light. And occasionally, very occasionally, there are dreams that feel different, weighted with portent, colored by something that seems to come from outside yourself. These latter dreams you will remember and share, for in your culture dreams can be messages from gods, ancestors, or the hidden parts of the world. A dream of ravens might be a sign from Odin. A dream of ships might foretell a journey or a raid. A dream of death might be a warning, or simply a reflection of the ever-present truth that life is fragile and brief. Sometime in the deep middle of the night, you shift position without waking, your body seeking to ease an ache, to find a better configuration. You might half-minus wake for a moment, aware of cold air on your face, the warmth of the furs, the soft household sounds. Then sleep reclaims you, pulling you back down into a darkness more complete than the one around you. Others in the longhouse sleep their own sleeps. A child dreams of playing by a river. Their spouse dreams of nothing, floating in blank unconsciousness. An elderly parent dreams of youth, reliving decades-minus old memories with strange clarity. Even the animals sleep, their simple dreams made of sensation and instinct, not narrative. The night deepens. Outside, stars will overhead in their eternal patterns, the same stars that guided your ancestors across seas, that will guide your descendants into futures you cannot imagine. Snow may be falling, soft flakes gathering in silence, or the aurora may be dancing, sheets of green and blue light rippling across the northern sky. A sight you've seen countless times but never cease to find beautiful and slightly eerie. Inside the longhouse, time moves differently. No hours, no minutes, just the slow progression from evening to night to the first hints of morning. The fire dies down further, barely glowing now, and the temperature drops. But this too is familiar, expected, and your sleeping body adjusts without waking, pulling furs tighter, shifting closer to the warmth of others. In the margins between sleep and waking, in those liminal moments that can come at any point in the night, you exist in a state later ages will largely lose. A kind of conscious dreaming where you are aware of lying in bed, yet also experiencing vivid mental imagery. Thoughts flow with dream-minus logic but haven't fully severed ties with waking awareness. In these moments, the line between inner and outer reality grows thin. A thought becomes a sensation, becomes a memory, becomes a vision, all flowing together without clear borders. This is when the world feels most mysterious, most full of hidden meaning. The gods seem nearer then, as if consciousness itself is a threshold where human and divine can meet. You might offer a wordless prayer, not asking for anything specific, but simply acknowledging forces larger than yourself. Or you might think of the dead, wondering if they still exist somewhere, if some part of them lingers in the world. The quality of rest you know is something most of your descendants will never experience. It's not that your sleep is free from disturbance, a crying child, a coughing kinsman, an animal's noise, your own bodily needs pulling you toward wakefulness. But when you wake briefly, There is no anxiety about it. No desperate struggle to reclaim sleep. No lying awake for hours worrying. You wake, tend to what needs tending, then slip back into sleep as easily as diving into water. This is partly cultural. You have no concept that sleep should be one unbroken block. So, you feel no distress when it fragments. But it is also biological. The sheer depth of your exhaustion means your body is always ready to return to sleep, always able to find that unconscious state again in moments. Sleep is not something you must chase or fight for. It is simply what your body does when given the chance. Your jaw muscles relax in sleep, your mouth may fall slightly open, your breath making soft sounds that blend with the household symphony. Your hands, finally still after a day of constant motion, rest on the furs, fingers occasionally twitching as dreams send phantom commands to move, to grip, to work. Her heart beats slow and steady, a stable, peaceful rhythm, the pulse of life continuing through the dark. Blood moves through your body, delivering oxygen, carrying away waste, performing the 10,000 tasks of cellular maintenance that never cease while life lasts. Your gut processes the evening meal, breaking down salted fish and barley porridge into what your body can use. Your immune system patrols for threats, fighting low-grade infections and injuries you aren't even aware of. All this happens in sleep, the body's chance to repair and maintain itself. Your brain, too, is busy in ways you could never consciously perceive. Memories are being sorted, important experiences tagged for long-term storage, trivial details allowed to fade. Neural connections are pruned or strengthened based on the day's learning. Cellular waste is cleared through channels that open more fully during sleep. The organ of consciousness is doing essential upkeep, preparing for another day of guiding your body through the world's demands. As the night moves toward morning, though morning in winter is barely distinct from night, your sleep begins to lighten, shifting from the deepest stages back toward something nearer to waking. Dreams grow more vivid, more narrative, your mind warming up its story-making machinery for consciousness. You might have a brief moment of confusion upon partly waking, forgetting for an instant where or when you are, before familiar sensations orient you: the smell of smoke, the sound of breathing, the weight of furs, the ache in your back. But you don't rise yet. It's still too early, too dark, too cold. So you burrow back into warmth, into the pocket of security you've made, and let sleep reclaim you one more time. This is the sweetest sleep, this early morning rest, because some part of you knows waking is inevitable, that the day and its demands are nearing. These final moments of unconsciousness feel precious precisely because they are fleeting. And so you rest, despite the cold pressing on the longhouse walls, despite the smoke that has seeped into every fiber of your being, despite the hunger never fully satisfied, and the pain that is your constant companion. Despite all the hardships that make your life, by later standards, objectively difficult, you sleep deeply and well. Because sleep is not chiefly about comfort. Sleep is about safety and exhaustion and surrender. It is about a body so thoroughly tired it has no choice but to rest. It is about the trust that comes from being encircled by kin, the trust that says you can lower your guard because others are watching too. It is about the simplicity of a life that, while hard, is also clear in its demands and expectations. In the modern world, people will toss and turn in climate-controlled bedrooms, their bodies comfortable, but their minds racing with anxieties about work, relationships, the 1,000 decisions contemporary life demands. They will lie awake for hours despite physical security and material comfort, because comfort alone does not guarantee rest. That you, in your smoky longhouse on the edge of a frozen fjord, sink into sleep as naturally as a stone sinks into water. The very hardships that make your waking life difficult conspire to make your sleep profound. Cold demands rest to conserve energy. The exhaustion eliminates restlessness. The proximity to family satisfies ancient needs for security. The absence of endless choices creates mental peace. This is the paradox at the heart of Viking sleep. The harsh world they inhabited actually fostered the deep rest that modern comfort often fails to provide. They slept not in spite of their lives' difficulty, but in a strange way because of it. He was born into that same world of smoke, cold, and ceaseless labor. The child who would become Guri Obergentry entered life in Iceland around the year 980 in a longhouse much like the one described. Her mother held her in the dim firelight, wrapped her in the same coarse wool, laid her to sleep in the same prickly straw bedding every Icelandic infant knew. But Guri UR's life, though it began ordinarily, would unfold into something remarkable not due to wealth or power, but because of the sheer scale of her travels and the quiet endurance she showed across decades of change. Her story lets us trace how sleep itself might have changed with circumstance. Childhood in Iceland, marriage and loss in Greenland, pregnancy in Vinland, and finally return and old age back in Iceland. Through her night, we see how the Vikings carried their rest across vast distances. As a small child, Guri would have slept as all Viking children did, piled with siblings or cousins, small bodies making shared warmth against the cold nights. She would have known the feeling of waking with an arm across her face, a foot pressed into her ribs, the tangle of family closeness that was how children survived winters. The sounds of the longhouse would have been her lullaby, her mother at the loom long after the children were abed. The soft talk of parents in the dark, the creak and shift of the settling building. Her childhood nights would have been filled with the stories that shaped her world. Someone, her father, perhaps, or a grandmother would have told the old tales as darkness gathered. Stories of Iceland's settlement, just generations before, when her ancestors came from Norway seeking land and freedom. Stories of gods walking among men in ancient days. Stories of heroes whose names were already becoming legend, deeds growing with each telling. These stories would have populated her dreams. In sleep, the child Guri might have imagined Thor's hammer crashing down on giants, or Odin riding his 8-legged horse across storm-clouds. She might have dreamed of a grandfather dead before her birth, yet vivid in her father's stories. Dreams, stories, and waking reality existed closer together in that world, the boundaries between them more porous than later ages would find comfortable. As she grew, her days filled with more responsibility, and her sleep began to carry the weight of labor. At 10 or 11, she would have been spinning wool daily, young fingers learning the rhythm, her back starting to ache from the posture. By her teens, she was fully part of the household economy, her contributions essential, not extra. And with this work came the familiar exhaustion that made sleep deep and immediate. The sagas, written down generations later, say Guri was considered attractive and capable, a woman who carried herself well and had the skills valued in her time. But the sagas cannot tell us of her young womanhood nights, the times she might have lain awake thinking of her future, wondering whom she would marry, what life awaited. These inner experiences leave no historical trace. We know her father, or Bjorn, decided to leave Iceland when Guri was a young woman. The choice would have been discussed in the household, debated in those evening hours when work was done but sleep had not yet taken everyone. Iceland was growing crowded, good land scarce, and opportunity seemed to lie west in Greenland, where Eric the Red had settled a generation earlier. Preparing for such a journey would have taken months. Goods to gather, animals to choose, arrangements to make with fellow travelers. Through all this, Guri would have lain awake some nights, excited and terrified in equal measure, imagining a future she could not clearly see. The last nights in her childhood home must have had a particular quality, a consciousness that each sleep there was numbered, that soon she would close her eyes in a wholly different place. The voyage itself transformed sleep into something strange and hard. On the ship carrying them west across the North Atlantic, there was no proper place to rest. You lay where you could, wedged between cargo and other passengers, the vessel pitching and rolling with each wave. Sleep came in snatches, brief unconsciousness snatched between bouts of sea's inscus and the constant wet chill of ocean's bray. Some nights at sea would have been unlike anything Guri had known. The dark was absolute when clouds hid the stars, moving, living darkness that seemed to breathe with the waves. The sounds were all wrong. Instead of the familiar creaks of a longhouse, there was the groan of shipped embers under strain, the slap of waves on the hull, the cry of seabirds following the vessel, and beneath it all, the constant awareness of black water just beyond the planks, deep and cold enough to kill in moments. But humans adapt. After days at sea, even this became almost normal. Courier would have learned to sleep despite the motion, her body finding balance with the ship's movement. She would have learned to ignore the constant damp, the salt crusting her hair and clothes, the close press of too many people into small a space. The exhaustion of fear and discomfort would have brought its own kind of rest. When they reached Greenland, misnamed by Eric, for it was as harsh as Iceland, perhaps harsher, Gurrier entered a new chapter. The settlement at Brat Ali, where Eric and his family lived, was the heart of the Norse presence in Greenland. Here, Gurrier would have slept in a longhouse again, but not her family's. She was a guest, a newcomer, her position uncertain, dependent on others' hospitality. It was in Greenland she married first. The Sagan aims her husband Ir, a Norwegian who had come seeking opportunity. Their marriage would have followed the usual patterns, practical concerns, mixed with whatever personal attraction lay between them. Their nights together would have been the shared experience of Viking married life, closeness in darkness, quiet conversations, the slow building of intimacy that comes from repeated nearness. But Uriah fell ill. The sagas mention this briefly, without detail, as they mentioned so many deaths a line or two. Then moving on. The Gurrier, his sickness would have turned her nights into vigils. He would have lain beside him as he failed, listening to labored breathing, feeling fever he'd radiate from his body, knowing death approached and being powerless to stop it. Nights of illness are their own special torment. The sleep stuns of worry, the half-minus sleep where you jerk awake at every change in the sick one's breath, the exhaustion that leaves you hollow but unable to truly rest. When Uriah finally died, Gurrier was left a widow in a land far from her birth, her future suddenly uncertain again. Grief has its own quality of sleep twins. In the nights after Uriah's death, Gurrier would have lain in darkness, acutely aware of the empty space beside her, the absence of his warmth, breath, presence. She would have found herself listening for sounds he would never make again, reaching in sleep for someone no longer there. This is habit's cruelty. The body learns to expect certain patterns and feels their absence as a physical ache. But life continues because it must. Deary Erst ate in Greenland. Herstead is now a widow living among her father's household in the wider community. He would have returned to the rhythm of women's work, perhaps finding solace in the familiar motions of spinning and weaving. The daily tasks that demanded attention and left little room to dwell on loss. It was during this time she met her Finn Erk Arlesi Efni, an Icelandic merchant who had come to Greenland to trade. Saga calls him wealthy and well-finest born, a man of good repute. Their courtship, if it can be called that, would have followed the usual forms: conversations in the longhouse's communal spaces, observations of character and capability, negotiations over practical matters, and finally marriage. With or Finner came a new possibility, a journey even more ambitious than the one that brought her to Greenland. Word had spread of lands farther west, found by leaf erics and forests and meadows, the Norse called Vinland. Finn was organizing an expedition to explore these lands, to try to settle, to see if Norse folk could make lives in this western world. And Gurrier chose to go with him. The decision would have required a particular courage. She was pregnant by then, carrying new life within as she prepared to sail into the unknown. The nights before departure must have held complex feelings: excitement for the adventure, fear for the child inside, the awareness she might never return. She would have placed hands on her belly in the dark, feeling small movements there, whispering prayers to Freyja or other gods of childbirth and protection. The voyage to Vinland was longer than the trip from Iceland to Greenland. Days stretched into weeks as the small fleet pushed west, following the coast south, seeking the lands Leif had described. Gurrier slept on the ship as her pregnancy advanced, her body changing, a child within perhaps responding to the constant motion of waves. When they finally reached Vinland, somewhere on the coast of what we now call North America, Gurrier stepped into a world utterly unlike anything Norse people knew. Forests were different, dominated by trees with no name in her tongue. The air smelled different, rich with unfamiliar plants. Even the light seemed different, falling through leaves that were not pine or birch. They built shelters, temporary structures meant to last their stay. These were not the solid longhouses of home, but cruder things. Still, they had walls, roofs, hearths. Still they gave shelter from the elements. And in one of these rough dwellings, as winter neared in the strange land, Gurir went into labor. The saga records. She bore a son they named Snorri. This child, born around the year 1000 or 1001, was likely the first European minus born in the Americas. The saga notes this fact without drama, simply as another event in the sequence. For Gurir, the experience would have been profoundly physical, immediate. The hours of labor, the pain, the final moment of birth, then the exhaustion and relief that follow. Her first nights with the newborn in that crude Vinland shelter would have been unlike any others. The sleepslands of new motherhood is universal, the infant waking every few hours to feed, the constant watch, the hyper-minus awareness of this small, fragile life depending entirely on her. But she knew this in a place thousands of miles from any Norse settlement, surrounded by forests home to peoples her culture did not know, in a season not quite the winter she knew, nor something wholly different. The child Snorri would have nursed at her breast in the dim hearth light, his small sounds the only noise in the deep night. Gurir would have held him, studying tiny features, marveling, as all mothers do, at the perfection of fingers and toes, the softness of skin, the mysterious person this baby would become. In those quiet hours, she might have wondered about his future, what life awaited him, whether they would stay in this new land or return to Greenland or Iceland. The Vinland settlement did not last. The sagas speak of conflicts with indigenous peoples they called deskarlings, encounters that sometimes turned violent. They mention strife among the Norse settlers themselves, disagreements over leadership and resources. The exact reasons for leaving are unclear, but within a few years the Norse gave up trying to colonize Vinland and prepared to return north. So Gurir found herself on a ship again, now with a small child to care for on the voyage. Nights at sea with an infant would have been far harder than her earlier crossings. Snorri would have been confused and frightened by the constant motion, crying more, hard to soothe. Gurir would have held him through the darkness, singing soft songs, offering comfort when she herself had little, being the stable island her child needed even as the ship pitched beneath them. They returned to Greenland first, spent time there, then made their way back to Iceland. Each leg of the journey had its own character of nights, the relief of solid ground after weeks at sea, the slow return to familiar patterns of life, the gradual fading of Vinland's intense strangeness into memory, then into story. Back in Iceland, Gurir and Finnr established a farm in landscapes that were known. Even if the spot was new, they built a life. More children came. The saga mentions a daughter, though her name is not given. Years passed in the usual rhythm of farm life, seasons turning, animals born and slaughtered, crops planted and harvested, children growing. Gurir's nights in these middle years would have been the ordinary nights of a prosperous farmer's wife. He would have lain beside Finnr in the dark, listening to the familiar sounds of an Icelandic longhouse, the structure and rhythms known since childhood. The extraordinary journeys of her youth settled into memory, becoming stories she told her children, the experiences that marked her as unusual among her neighbors. When Finnr died, the saga Osen say when how Gurir was widowed a second time. She was older now, her children grown or nearly so, her place secure through land and family ties. But the loss would still have cut deep. The empty space in the bed where Finnr had lain, the silence where his breathing had been, the return of that particular loneliness Widwood brings. The saga tells something remarkable of Gurir's final years. After Finnr's death, she made a pilgrimage to Rome, an extraordinary journey for anyone from Iceland, but especially for a woman, and especially for one who had already traveled more widely than almost any Norse person of her generation. She walked pilgrim roads south through Europe, reaching the heart of Catholic Christendom, seeing lands and peoples that made even Vinland seem less strange by comparison. We can only imagine the nights of that journey. Gurir, now perhaps in her 50s or 60s, sleeping in pilgrim hostels and monasteries, surrounded by languages she did not speak, customs she did not understand. Pets would have been different straw pallets in common dormitories, harder or softer than she knew, smelling of other herbs, other kinds of human closeness. She would have lain awake sometimes in the dark, listening to strangers breathing, reflecting on how far she had come in distance and years from that childhood longhouse in Iceland. The saga says that after returning to Iceland from her pilgrimage, Guri became a nun, living out her last years in religious seclusion. The church was still new to Iceland and her lifetime conversion happened around the year 1000, during her young adulthood. Monastic life would have been yet another completely different experience of daily existence and nightly rest. In a convent, sleep would have been structured by liturgical hours. Guri would have risen in the night for prayers, lain down and gotten up according to bells marking time's divisions, slept in a small cell rather than the communal warmth of a longhouse. This final change in her sleeping life would have been profound, from the crowded intimacy of Norse households to the solitary cell of a religious woman. What did she think in those final nights? Did she remember her childhood longhouse, the ship voyages across grey seas, the strange Finland forest where her son was born? Did she remember Eiond or Finnur, the two men she had married and lost? Did she remember her younger self, uncertain and brave in equal measure, stepping onto ships bound for unknown places? The saga cannot tell us these inner experiences. It records the outer facts: born in Iceland, traveled to Greenland, journeyed to Vinland, returned to Iceland, went to Rome, became a nun. But the inner life stays hidden. Yet we can guess something of Guri character from the life she led. She was someone who met change again and again and adapted, who faced loss and continued, who was capable of both domestic routine and extraordinary adventure. Her nights across the decades would have held all the varieties of sleep a Viking life could offer. The deep, exhausted sleep of childhood in a crowded longhouse, the broken sleep of sea voyages on pitching ships, the vigil sleep beside dying loved ones, the half-minus wakeful alertness of new motherhood, the comfortable rhythms of married life in middle age, the strange alertness of travel in foreign lands, the structured sleep of monastic life. Through all these transformations, some essential core of her remained, whatever made her Guri, allowing her to carry her identity across such vast changes of circumstance. And each night, wherever she was, she would have performed the small rituals of preparing for sleep, settling her body into whatever bedding was there, pulling covers around herself, closing her eyes against whatever dark surrounded her, and letting consciousness slip away into the universal human experience of sleep. The saga's last mention of Guri says simply she lived to a great age. We don't know exactly when she died or what her final nights were like. Perhaps in her convent cell she felt death approaching, as the old often do. Perhaps she welcomed it, weary after such a long full life. Perhaps she was afraid, facing that last unknown, as she had faced so many before. But what we can say with certainty is that Guri's life, and thus her night, spanned a remarkable range of human experience. He slept in for different lands across the North Atlantic. She slept as a child, a wife, a widow, a mother, a pilgrim, a nun. She slept in warmth and cold, in safety and danger, in comfort and grief. Through it all, she showed that fundamental human ability to rest wherever rest was possible, to find sleep even in difficult circumstances, to wake the next morning and go on. This resilience, perhaps more than any specific achievement, is what her story offers us. She was not a queen, a warrior, or a saint, but an ordinary woman who lived an extraordinary life and who each night found whatever rest the world would grant before facing another day. In this way, Guri's nights illuminate the larger Viking experience of sleep. They show us rest was not a luxury or a simple state, but something that had to be found, made, kept through all of life's changes and challenges. They show us sleep evolved with circumstances, but remained essential, a constant need met in varying ways as life unfolded. When we picture Guri's final sleep, that last time she closed her eyes sometime in the mid-11th century, we might see her old, her body worn by decades of labor and travel, her mind full of memories spanning half the world. Perhaps she dreamed one last time of Vinland's strange forests, or the ships that carried her across so many seas, or faces she had loved and lost. Perhaps she simply slipped from sleeping into death without drama, as peacefully as she had slipped into sleep thousands of nights before. The saga doesn't say, and it need not. Guru Ur's life, traced through documents and archaeology and inference, gives us a window into how Vikings experienced not just sleep, but life itself as a series of nights and days, each to be endured or enjoyed, each offering hardship and possibility. She carried the Viking world with her wherever she went, including the particular relationship with rest and dark her culture had shaped. And in the end, she returned to the earth somewhere in Iceland, completing a circle that had taken her farther than almost anyone of her time before bringing her home. The Vikings did not sleep alone, even in solitude. This is not metaphor, but a reflection of their understanding of reality, to cosmos filled with beings and forces that did not respect the borders between seen and unseen, waking and sleeping, living and dead. To grasp Viking sleep fully, we must enter this shadowy realm where belief and experience mingled, where dreams were not just null events but possible messages from elsewhere. The night was not empty for these people. It was crowded with presences, thick with possibility, alive with forces moving to their own purposes. Start with a simple fact: Vikings believed dreams could carry meaning. This was not unique to the most traditional societies, see dreams as potentially significant. But the specific nature of Norse dream minus belief shaped how they experienced the night. A dream was not automatically dismissed as random firing of nerves, or wish minus fulfillment, or the result of a bad meal. Instead, each dream held the possibility of being something more: a window, a message, a glimpse into the patterns governing existence. The sagas are full of prophetic dreams told in the same matter minus fact tone as any other event. Someone dreams of a blood minus covered goose, and later their daughter is killed. Someone dreams of a sinking ship and refuses a voyage that indeed ends in disaster. Someone dreams of a woman in white giving a warning, and the warning proves true. These accounts were written long after the events, but they show a consistent pattern. Dreams were taken seriously as possible sources of knowledge. Imagine, then, how this belief would affect waking from a vivid dream in the middle of the night. You lie in the longhouse dark, heart perhaps racing from some intense dream experience, and must decide: was this just a dream, or a warning, a message, a glimpse of truth? The uncertainty itself would create a particular quality of nighttime consciousness, a sense that sleep was not merely rest, but a kind of threshold experience. This was not the passive unconsciousness of modern sleep theory, but something more active, more fraught with meaning. Some dreams in Norse belief came from the gods. Odin the All-Father was especially linked to hidden knowledge and prophecy, his single-seeing depths obscure to ordinary mortals. True dream of ravens, Odin nest birds hug in and mewn in bottled memory, might be seen as receiving the gods' attention. The dream of battles might mean Odin Ness' interest in you as a potential warrior for his hall in the afterlife, a prospect both honorable and deeply unsettling. These were not comfortable beliefs, but ones that placed weight and significance on the sleeping mind. The gods were not distant abstract powers in Norse cosmology, but active participants in human affairs, prone to interference, able to reach into mortal dreams with their own agendas. Other dreams might come from the dead. The boundary between living and dead was not absolute. It was permeable, crossable, able to be breached under certain conditions. The dead dwelt in various afterlife realms: warriors in Valhalla, others in Hel's domain, some in Freyja's halls, but they were not necessarily cut off from the world of the living. Ancestors might appear in dreams to offer guidance or warnings to descendants, their voices crossing the divide death made. A recently dead family member might visit in dreams to communicate something important, or to seek something they needed. These visits were not always gentle or welcome. Sometimes the dead came with demands, grievances, unfinished business that troubled their rest and that of the living. This belief had practical effects on how people prepared for sleep. The small rituals done before lying down, touching an amulet, whispering a prayer, checking protective symbols, were not mere superstition, but reasonable precautions in a world where the night was understood to be permeable to influences both good and ill. You were preparing to cross a threshold, to enter a state where you were vulnerable, and it made sense to take measures for safety. These preparations were as routine as checking weapons were within reach, or banking the fire properly practical responses to a reality that included both physical and spiritual dimensions. Runes played a part in this protective framework. The runic alphabet was not just a writing system, but was invested with magical and spiritual meaning. Each character resonated with power beyond its communicative function. Specific runes were linked to protection, to warding off harm, to ensuring safe passage through danger. Archaeology shows runes carved into wooden bedminus posts, inscribed on amulets, marked on door frames. These were not decorative, but functional, meant to create a protected space, a zone where harmful influences could not easily enter. The exact workings of these protective runes are now mostly lost to us. The meanings and uses of runes were probably never systemated as later magical systems would be. They were folk practices, varying by region and practitioner, passed down in families or learned from local experts. But their presence throughout the Norse world shows a consistent belief that symbols could offer protection, that carved marks could somehow affect the invisible forces moving through the world. The runes were not prayers to distant gods, but active tools for shaping reality in subtle, meaningful ways. Think what this meant psychologically. When you lay down to sleep, you did so within a space symbolically protected, its boundaries marked and reinforced by tradition and belief. The runes on the bedminus post or the amulet at your neck were tangible reminders you had taken steps to ensure safety in the vulnerable state of sleep. This might have functioned like a child's night-light, not because it actually prevents real danger, but because it gives psychological comfort, allowing rest. But the Norse cosmos held genuine threats, or what were understood as such. The Dr. Augustar, the undead, the restless dead who had not gone peacefully to their rest, were a particular source of nighttime anxiety. These were not the shambling corpses of later zombie tales, but something more ambiguous and troubling. Dead who kept intelligence and malice, who might have reason to harm the living, who could be met at boundaries and thresholds. The Dr. August, or worm Emery and grudge, made manifest the past refusing to stay safely buried. Circumstances that might create a drive August are varied. Someone who died violently or too soon might not rest well, their spirit clinging to the world with the desperation of their final moments. Someone greedy or cruel in life might cling to the material world after death, unable to let go of possessions and power. Someone whose burial rites were not done properly might be unable to complete the journey to the afterlife, stuck in a liminal state between worlds. The anxiety about proper treatment of the dead, the care taken with burials, offerings made, rituals performed, came partly from genuine grief and respect, but also from the practical worry that mistreating the dead could have consequences for the living. This was not abstract ethics, but concrete safety, ensuring those who departed did so peacefully and without cause to return. Stories of Dr. August. Our encounters often happen at night. This is partly narrative convention. Ghost stories naturally belong to darkness, but it also reflects the genuine Norse understanding that night was when boundaries thinned. The same dark that gave rest also gave cover to things that did not belong to the daylit world. When you woke in the deep middle of the night, hearing a sound you couldn't immediately place, the thought of a Dr. Auguster might surface and bident, unwanted, but hard to dismiss entirely. Yet it is important not to overstate the fear. These beliefs existed alongside practical, pragmatic attitudes toward life and death. Vikings were not paralyzed by supernatural terror any more than modern people are paralyzed by fear of crime or accident. The same person who believed Dr. August Dare were possible also went about daily life without constant dread, slept soundly most nights, did not see supernatural threats lurking everywhere. The beliefs provided a framework for understanding unusual experiences, but they did not dominate every moment of consciousness. The idea of the land VET Erland spirits or land whites added another layer to the unseen world surrounding Viking sleep. These were beings tied to specific places, neither gods nor ancestors but something else, perhaps existing before human habitation. They needed to be treated with respect, appeased with small offerings, acknowledged as one might a powerful neighbor whose goodwill matters. The land vet were the original inhabitants. Humans were, in a sense, tenants who needed to keep good relations with the landlords. When Vikings built new farmsteads, they might leave offerings for the land vetir, asking permission to live on the land and promising to treat it well. When ships neared Iceland, law required removing dragon-head prows, as they frightened the land spirit, sail eagle rule and coding spiritual belief into civil regulation. These were not seen as superstitions, but as reasonable ways to interact with a world alive in ways beyond just plants and animals. The land itself had awareness, preferences, the power to bless or curse human efforts depending on how it was treated. At night, in quiet dark, the land vetir were understood to be more active. This belief would have shaped how people experienced nighttime sounds. The creak of wood, rustle in grass outside. The sense of presence darkness can bring. These sounds were not necessarily threatening, but reminders the land itself had its own life, rhythms, awareness persisting regardless of human activity. The night belonged to the land vetir in a way the day did not. Humans retreated indoors, and the spirits moved more freely through the landscape. Dreams of landscapes, hills opening to reveal hidden halls, being led by strange figures to remarkable places were sometimes seen as encounters with land vetir or related beings. These dreams had a different feel than ordinary dreams, or so it was thought. They felt more real, solid, memorable. On waking, the dreamer might have a sense of having actually traveled somewhere, of experiencing something beyond mere imagination. Some claim to remember details of these otherworldly places with unusual clarity, as if the experience were encoded differently than normal dreams. Archaeology offers some support for the importance of dreams in the unseen world in Norse life. Grave goods include amulets and charms, protective objects meant to safeguard the dead and whatever came after. The care taken with burials, body placement, objects chosen, construction of burial mounds or ships, shows a sophisticated view of death as transition, not end, and thus of the dead as still somehow present or capable of presence. Elaborate ship burials especially suggest a journey metaphor implying continued existence and activity. Excavations of longhouses have revealed small caches of objects, with possible ritual meaning, collections of unusual stones, careful arrangements of animal bones, traces of burned herbs. These finds suggest practices aimed at influencing unseen forces, creating protective or favorable conditions. Some caches are near sleeping areas, implying nighttime protection was specifically important. The placement was random, but deliberate, suggesting certain spots in the longhouse were seen as particularly vulnerable or in need of spiritual reinforcement. The herbs are particularly interesting. Healing analysis and preserved plant remains show Vikings had access to various plants we now know have calming properties: chamomile, valerian, lavender when obtainable through trade. Whether these were used deliberately as sleep aids is guesswork, but knowledge of which plants affected mood and consciousness certainly existed. The VOL or female shamans or seers used substances to reach trance states, and this plant minus lore likely extended to more everyday household uses too. Imagine, then, a complete picture of Norse nighttime practice. Before sleep, small rituals, checking protective runes, perhaps burning a pinch of herb, whispering a prayer to Thor for protection or Freyja for good dreams, touching amulets, settling into familiar sleeping places, the nearness of family giving psychological safety. Then, the descent into sleep. Understanding you were crossing a threshold into a realm where different rules applied, where self grew more poised, the world more mysterious. The nighttime soundscape would have been interpreted through this framework. Seemed howling around the longhouse was just wind, until it wasn't, until its voice seemed to carry intention or message, until it sounded like words or warnings. Creaking timbers were just the structures settling until they sounded like footsteps, like something moving with purpose through the dark. Every sound held potential meaning, and interpreting sounds would have shaped the quality of waking and half-waking consciousness at night. When you woke from a troubling dream, you would lie in dark trying to judge its meaning. Is it a true dream or a false one, coming from elsewhere or just your own mind spinning tales? Did it carry a warning to heed? Or was it merely your own fears taking shape? Then while you might tell it to family, seeking their interpretation, comparing it to patterns they knew from previous dreams or traditional dream-minus lore. If it seemed especially significant, you might consult someone with special knowledge, a VOLVA or a GOI who could offer insight into what the dream meant. These specialists kept catalogs of dream symbolism, knowing what certain images or narratives traditionally signified, though they also relied on intuition and their own access to hidden knowledge. Here we meet one of the great mysteries of Viking sleep. To what extent did belief create experience? If you thoroughly believe dreams can be prophetic, do you have different dreams than someone who believes dreams are just neural noise? If you believe the night is peopled by unseen beings, does this belief actually shape what you experience in the dark? The link between expectation and perception is complex. We cannot simply dismiss Viking experiences as entirely made by culture, nor can we accept them uncritically as objective meetings with supernatural beings. Modern sleep research suggests cultural beliefs do influence dream and sleep experiences. People dream in culturally specific ways, using the symbols and stories their culture provides, their sleeping minds working with the raw material of waking life. Vikings, then, would have had dreams filled with their gods, ancestors, their culturally specific understanding of the cosmos. A medieval European Christian might dream of angels and demons, a Viking might dream of ravens, ship-minus burials, the halls of the slain. But there's another possibility worth considering. Perhaps some experiences Vikings attributed to contact with the unseen world were actually forms of sleep phenomena we now understand differently. Sleep paralysis, waking unable to move, often with a sense of presence or pressure, is a universal human experience interpreted through cultural lenses. In Viking culture, such an experience might have been understood as meeting a drive August or Orland VETI or other non-human entity, the terrifying feeling of weight on the chest, inability to cry out, sense of malevolent presence. All features of sleep paralysis fit perfectly the Norse understanding of nighttime spiritual encounters. Hyping agug ic and hypnopompic hallucinations, vivid sensory experiences at the threshold between sleeping and waking might have been similarly interpreted. That moment when you're not quite asleep or awake, when you might hear voices, see figures, feel odd sensations, was seen not as a quirk of neurology, but as evidence the boundary between worlds was thin. In this way, Viking belief and Viking experience reinforced each other. Beliefs give a framework for interpreting ambiguous experiences, and the experiences confirm the beliefs a self-reinforcing system, neither purely subjective nor purely objective, but more complex. This is not to dismiss the beliefs as false. In many ways, the question of objective truth is less interesting than how the belief shaped life as it was lived. For a Viking lying awake in darkness, whether Dr. Auguste really existed mattered less than that the possibility of Dr. Auguste shaped how they experienced and responded to the night. The same psychological dynamic that made Vikings formidable warriors might have also affected their sleep. They were a culture comfortable with violence, familiar with death, possessing a certain fatalism from their religious beliefs. The idea of weird fate, that your doom was already set, meant excessive worry about death was somewhat pointless. This attitude might have brought a psychological freedom, including freedom from the kind of anxiety that disrupts sleep. If you believe your fate is already written, your death-day set regardless of precautions, there's less reason to lie awake fearing all that might go wrong. You take reasonable care, carry weapons, post guards, do protective rituals, but then you rest, trusting that if it's your time, it's your time, it's your time, and if not, you'll wake to face another day. Attitude toward the afterlife also mattered. Unlike some religions promising punishment for moral failings, the Norse afterlife was more about honor and reputation than universal ethical behavior. What mattered was how you were remembered, whether you died well, whether your deeds would be spoken of after death. This focus on reputation rather than divine judgment might have created different nighttime anxieties, less fear of supernatural punishment, more concern with living in a way worthy of remembrance. The VOLer occupied a special place in this nighttime cosmos. These women were seen to have particular access to hidden knowledge, ability to see what others could not, to navigate boundaries between worlds with more skill and safety. They perform rituals when entered trances, spoke prophecies. Some practices involve deliberate altering of consciousness, chanting, meditation, using mind minus changing substances to reach states where the border between seen and unseen, groom or permeable. What did the VOLR experience in these altered states? The historical record can only tell what observers reported, not the subjective feeling, not what it was like from inside to journey between worlds. But we can guess they met visions, heard voices, had experiences they understood as communication with gods, spirits, or the dead. Whether these experiences came from outside or were generated within was probably a distinction they wouldn't have found meaningful. The experience itself and the knowledge or insight it gave were what mattered. For ordinary people, the existence of VOLR provided a resource for dealing with troubling dreams or nighttime experiences. If you had a disturbing dream or an unexplained night encounter, you could consult a VOLVA for interpretation or advice. This outsourcing of uncertainty might itself have been psychologically helpful, letting people rest easier knowing if something truly important happened, it could be properly assessed and addressed. VOLR served as intermediaries, translators between the ordinary world and the realm of hidden knowledge. Seasonal changes in daylight dramatically affected nighttime experience of the unseen world. During long polar nights of winter, when darkness stretched most of the day, the sense of being immersed in the realm of shadows and spirits would have been inescapable. Boundaries that seemed clearer in summer's bright light dissolved in winter's endless twilight. Conversely, in brief summer nights when dark never fully fell, the unseen world might have seemed more distant, less immediately present, less pressing on consciousness. This seasonal swing between different qualities of dark would have created an annual rhythm to spiritual life, just as it did to physical life. Winter was time for sitting by fires telling stories, for the dead seeming close, for dreams being especially vivid and meaningful. Summer was time for action and activity, for the physical world demanding full attention, for the unseen receding to the background of awareness. Vikings lived in sync with these cycles, adjusting their relationship with the invisible world according to season. The relationship between Vikings and their unseen cosmos was primarily one of fear, though fear was present. It was more one of negotiation and navigation, of learning to move skillfully through a landscape including both visible and invisible dimensions. The unseen world was dangerous, but not incomprehensible. There were protocols for interacting with it, precautions to take, specialists to help when needed. This gave people a sense of agency, not helplessness. You might not control whether a Dr. Augustar existed, but you could control whether you treated your dead properly. You might not command the land VETIR, but you could show them respect, make suitable offerings, avoid actions that would anger them. This sense of agency extended to the practice of sleep itself. Sleep was something that just happened or didn't based on uncontrollable factors. It was something you prepared for through ritual, protected through symbols and prayers, navigated with awareness of its spiritual dimensions. Physical and spiritual aspects of sleep weren't separate in Viking thinking. They were unified parts of a single experience. To sleep well was just a matter of physical comfort, but of spiritual preparation, of ensuring you had done what was needed to make the night safe. Archaeological finds keep adding nuance to our understanding. An excavation in Norway revealed a burial where the dead had been laid with stones placed over the body, not disrespect, but possibly a precaution to keep the dead from walking. This practice, found in various forms across the Norse world, shows how seriously the possibility of restless dead was taken. The living took concrete steps to ensure their dead stayed peacefully in their graves, treating the threat of Dr. Augustar as a practical concern needing practical solutions. Another excavation in Iceland uncovered a farmstead where one room seemed dedicated to ritual purposes. Artifacts found there carefully arranged stones, traces of burned offerings, carved wooden objects of unclear function suggest a space set aside for interacting with the unseen world. This wasn't a formal temple, but a household shrine, showing spiritual practice was woven into daily life, not separated into a distinct religious sphere. The sacred and mundane shared the same physical and conceptual space. The Norse cosmos, rebuilt from sagas, archaeology, and comparative myth, was complex, layered. Multiple afterlife realms existed at once, each with its own character and entry requirements. Gods were powerful, but not all minus powerful, subject themselves to fate, able to be wounded or killed. Giants and monsters lurked at the edges of the ordered world, always threatening to break through, held back by the gods' constant watch but never finally defeated. Time itself was seen as cyclical, the world destined to end in Ragnarok only to be reborn after. This cosmological complexity meant sleep existed within a rich symbolic framework. When you closed your eyes, you weren't just shutting down consciousness for a period of rest. You were entering a state where normal boundaries of self and world grew more porous, where you might travel in dreams to other realms, where you were vulnerable but also potentially open to knowledge and experience unavailable in waking life. Sleep was a kind of journey, and like any journey it required preparation and awareness. The very architecture of the longhouse reflected this understanding of layered realities. The structure was carefully oriented, aligned with cardinal directions or significant landscape features. Its placement in the world was arbitrary, but meaningful. The door faced a certain way. The hearth stood at the center. Sloping platforms were deliberately positioned. These weren't random choices, but ways of anchoring the human dwelling within a larger cosmic order, ensuring the space gave not just physical shelter but spiritual protection too. We might see the longhouse itself as a protective symbol, a human minus-made boundary between the ordered world of culture and the chaotic world of nature and spirits. Inside, fire-lightened human presence made a zone of relative safety, a bubble of warmth and sociability carved from the dark. Outside, darkened wilderness held forces at best indifferent, at worst actively hostile to human will minus being. Walls weren't just wood, but also symbolic barriers, and rituals done within them reinforced their protective function. Keeping animals inside the longhouse in winter had spiritual dimensions beyond practical warmth minus sharing. Animals were understood to have their own relationships with the unseen world, their own sensitivities to presences and disturbances humans might miss. Dogs might bark at things humans can't see. Horses might refuse to enter certain areas as if sensing something wrong, their instincts giving information their human companions lacked. Animals' presence was companionable, but also provided an early warning system for spiritual disturbances. Their senses extended human awareness, offering another layer of protection against threats that might approach unseen. Saga accounts tell of animals acting strangely before supernatural events. The horse refuses to go near a burial mound, fighting its rider's efforts to make it. The dog growls at empty air, hackles raised, attention fixed on something invisible. Cattle grow restless for no clear reason, moving anxiously, sensing some disturbance in the normal order. These behaviors were taken seriously as signs something in the unseen world was active. For people sleeping near these animals, the sounds and movements became part of the nighttime information stream, signals to interpret and assess. Sudden barking might mean an intruder, or something else entirely. The question remains, one with no definitive answer: did Vikings sleep deeply because they trusted their protections against the unseen world, or despite their awareness of it? Did belief in protective runes and proper rituals create enough sense of safety to allow depressed? Or did awareness of potential spiritual dangers create an underlying vigilance that lightened sleep, keeping consciousness nearer the surface, ready to respond to any disturbance? The answer likely varied by individual temperament and specific situation, by personality and circumstance. On a night when dreams had been troubling, when sounds in dark seemed meaningful, when something during the day had sparked spiritual anxiety, sleep might have been lighter, more fitful. The mind would hover near wakefulness, monitoring, assessing, unable to fully let go into deep unconsciousness. On ordinary nights, when rituals were properly done and nothing seemed amiss, sleep might have come easily. Protections offered psychological comfort, facilitating rest. The same person might sleep very differently from one night to the next depending on context and recent experience. What we can say more certainly is that the Viking relationship with the unseen world was dynamic, not static. It wasn't a fixed set of superstitions followed mindlessly, but an ongoing negotiation with mystery, a living tradition evolving in response to experience. When experiences happened, the cultural framework held and adequately explained, the framework adapted. New interpretations emerged. New practices developed. Understanding of how the unseen world worked kept changing. The tradition was alive, growing, responding to challenges and questions arising. This adaptability shows in how Norse culture responded to Christianity as it spread through Scandinavia. Rather than simply replacing old beliefs overnight, there was a period of Sigmattist where Christian and pagan ideas mixed, where people moved between frameworks. People might wear both Thor's hammer and a cross, might call on both old gods and the Christian God, might interpret dreams through multiple frameworks at once. This suggests a pragmatic attitude toward the unseen. What mattered was effectiveness, whether beliefs and practices actually helped to navigate life's uncertainties. In the end, the mystery of Viking sleep is inseparable from the mystery of Viking consciousness itself. How did it feel to inhabit a mind understanding reality in these ways, to perceive the world through this particular cultural lens, to experience dreams, not as random neural events, but as possible communications, to lie down at night, knowing you were crossing a threshold into a realm where different rules applied, where ordinary protections of daylight and activity no longer held. We can rebuild beliefs and practices, but the subjective experience stays elusive, separated from us by time and worldview. Archaeology gives us objects and structures. Sagas give us stories and beliefs. But the inner life of a Viking preparing for sleep remains mostly inaccessible to direct knowledge. Yet perhaps this elusiveness is fitting. The Vikings themselves would have understood some things resist full explanation. That mystery is an essential feature of existence, not a problem to be solved. The unseen world was, by definition, not fully knowable. You could learn to navigate it, gain wisdom about how to interact with it, gather practical knowledge of what worked and what didn't, but you couldn't master it or explain it away. And so they slept, surrounded by symbols and rituals, embedded in their cultural framework, trusting in protections as much psychological as metaphysical. They slept deeply when exhaustion demanded, lightly when circumstances called for vigilance, and somewhere between most nights. They woke from dreams they discussed and interpreted, or from dreamless sleep offering pure rest. They carried their understanding of the unseen world with them through the dark, letting it shape but not dominate their experience of night. Archaeological and textual evidence will never give us full access to this inner experience. We cannot know for sure if a Viking farmer waking at midnight, hearing a strange sound, felt the same quality of fear and wonder the written sagas suggest. We cannot measure the psychological effect of wearing a protective amulet or sleeping in a ruin minus inscribed longhouse. Cannot enter the dreams of people 1,000 years dead, cannot access their sleeping consciousness, cannot fully reconstruct what it felt like to be them in those dark hours. But we can see Vikings developed a sophisticated approach to managing night's uncertainties, an approach combining practical measures, symbolic protections, communal support, and a cosmological framework. This approach let them find rest in a world harsh and unpredictable, to sleep despite awareness of dangers both physical and spiritual, to wake each morning ready to face another demanding day. The system worked in its way, giving both practical and psychological resources for navigating sleep's vulnerability. The unseen world watching them sleep was neither purely good nor purely bad in Norse understanding. It was complex, many-sided, requiring wisdom and respect rather than simple faith or fear. It held gods who might be capricious, ancestors who might be helpful or demanding, spirits who might be friendly or hostile depending on how treated. And Vikings, practical even in spiritual matters, developed practices letting them coexist with mystery, not be paralyzed by it. They made peace with not knowing everything, with living in a world where borders between possible and impossible were run differently than in later times. This acceptance of mystery might itself have aided rest. If you don't expect to understand everything, don't demand reality follow simple patterns, don't require total control over your circumstances, you can more easily surrender to sleep. You can let go into darkness, trusting whatever protections you've put in place are enough, that your fate will unfold as it will regardless of your worrying. That morning will come with another chance to navigate existence complexities. Fatalism that might seem bleak from a modern view might actually have been freeing in practice, releasing people from the burden of believing they could control everything. The communal nature of Viking sleep also deserves emphasis. Unlike modern individualized sleeping arrangements where each person usually has their own room, or at least bed, Vikings slept near family members in spaces where breath and warmth were shared. This nearness was partly practical. Bodies gave warmth in cold climates, and longhouse design concentrated people near the hearth. But it also had psychological dimensions, creating a sense of safety through presence, the knowledge you weren't alone in the dark. When a child woke frightened from a dream, parents were within arm's reach. When someone heard a disturbing sound, they could check with others if they heard it too, could judge the threat together rather than facing it alone. This communal approach meant nighttime experiences were oft unshared and interpreted collectively, not purely individual. A particularly vivid dream might be told next morning and become part of family lore, woven into the shared understanding of what the unseen world was doing and wanting. Long winter nights would have made this communal aspect especially important. When dark stretched from mid-afternoon to mid-morning, when days were brief twilight interludes, the longhouse became the whole world for long periods. The shared sleeping space became a kind of nest, a protected hollow in the vast dark outside, and the rituals and protections around it took on added meaning. The fire needed keeping not just for warmth, but for what it represented: human presence, the ordered world, the light holding shadows at bay. The storytelling's role in Viking culture also intersected with sleep practices. Long evenings gave time for telling sagas, tales of gods and heroes, passing on the culture's accumulated wisdom and knowledge. These stories weren't just entertainment, but education, teaching listeners how the world worked, what behaviors were valued, what dangers existed, how to navigate them. Many stories dealt explicitly with nighttime themes: Dr. August or encounters, prophetic dreams, the importance of proper burial rites. Hearing these stories repeatedly, often in evening hours before sleep, people absorbed a framework for interpreting their own nighttime experiences. When they had a strange dream or met something unsettling in the dark, they had a catalog of similar experiences to draw on, patterns to recognize, precedents to follow. Stories gave a map of the unseen world, not precise or complete, but better than nothing. Certainly better than facing the unknown without cultural resources. The oral tradition was practical this way, serving a psychological function alongside preserving cultural memory. We might also consider music and poetry's role in the Viking nighttime world. Skaldes, poet minus bards, crafted complex verses encoding history, myth, and wisdom in memorable forms. Their poems were often performed evenings in the longhouse's gathered community, creating a sonic environment, shaping the transition to sleep. The rhythms and rhymes of old Norse poetry, the alliteration in kennings, created patterns that might linger in the mind as consciousness drifted towards sleep. Some evidence suggests certain chants or rhythmic speech were used deliberately to induce trance or help the VOLUR's boundary minus crossing work. While most people didn't engage in these specialized practices, they knew of them, understood sound and rhythm could affect consciousness. This knowledge might have influenced more ordinary nighttime practices, leading people to hum or chant softly preparing for sleep, using sound as a tool to manage the transition between states. Lullabies sung to children served this function, but adults might have had their own versions, their own ways of using sound to ease the passage into sleep. The concept of hamming a kind of personal spiritual power, or luck that could be strong or weak, inherited or earned, also relates to sleep and dreams. A person with strong him was not only more likely to succeed in visible ventures, but also more protected in invisible realms. Dreams might be. Not all Vikings slept the same way, in the same conditions, with the same quality of rest. Social hierarchy shaped every part of life, and sleep was no exception. To see the full picture of Viking sleep, we must look at how wealth and status created different nighttime experiences not necessarily more restful despite being more materially comfortable. This is one of the great ironies of Viking life. Those with the softest beds sometimes slept the least soundly. Start with physical differences. A wealthy farmer or successful chieftain would have a larger, better-built, better-insulated longhouse than a common farmer's. Walls would be higher-quality timber fitted more precisely. The roof would be more carefully thatched, less likely to leak. Space would be greater, allowing more separation between areas. Inside such a longhouse, sleeping arrangements would be notably better. Instead of crude straw mattresses, the wealthy might have mattresses stuffed with down or wool, softer and more comfortable. Their blankets would be finer wool, perhaps even imported textiles, silk from distant trade routes, beautifully dyed and woven fabric showing significant wealth. Their furs would be more luxurious bear, fox, not just the sheepskin available to all. Archaeological digs at high-status sites show evidence of these material differences. At wealthy farmsteads, researchers find traces of textiles including silk threads, fragments of elaborate weaving, evidence of expensive dyes. Beds appear more elaborate structures, sometimes with carved wooden frames, decorative elements turning functional furniture into status symbols. Sleeping platforms were larger, offering more space and thus more physical comfort. Yet this material superiority came with its own complications. A wealthy Norse household wasn't just a family unit, but a complex social entity with many people in various relations to the head. There would be family members certainly, but also retainers, workers, guests, and possibly our slaves on the social ladder's lowest rung. All lived under one roof, creating social dynamics, shaping the nighttime experience. The wealthy slept with an awareness of position commoners didn't have to maintain. A chieftain or prosperous farmer was responsible not just for immediate family, but the broader household. They needed to ensure all were fed, disputes settled fairly, the complex social machinery of the household ran smoothly. This responsibility created a different quality of nighttime consciousness, less the pure exhaustion bringing deep sleep, more of vigilance never fully switching off. Consider the political side of high-status Viking life. Alliances between powerful families were essential but fragile. A chieftain needed to keep good relations with other chieftains to navigate the complex web of obligations and feud structuring Norse political life. Marriage alliances had to be managed carefully. Inheritance issues could create family tensions. Feuds, once started, could last generations, always carrying the chance of violence. These political concerns didn't vanish at night. A wealthy man lying in his comfortable bed might find his mind turning over the day's conversations, analyzing what someone said or didn't, worrying whether an alliance was solid or starting to fray. The fairy networks bringing power and wealth also brought anxiety. A common farmer worried about crops and animals, a chieftain worried about those plus allies' loyalty and rivals' intentions. Saga literature is full of accounts of feuds escalating through misunderstanding and pride, alliances collapsing, violence erupting suddenly from tensions built over years. The men and women at the center of these dramas were the wealthy and powerful, living with constant awareness a wrong word or deed could trigger consequences affecting whole families. This awareness would have shaped their sleep, perhaps making it lighter, more easily disturbed, less completely restorative. High-status women faced their own particular pressures. In Norse society, women could own property, manage estates, wield significant power within their sphere. But with power came responsibility. A wealthy woman was expected to manage the household economy, oversee food production and textile work, maintain hospitality, navigate social dynamics among other women. And her husband was away trading or raiding. She held even more responsibility. A high-status woman's nights might be partly awake, listening for problems needing her attention, a sick child, certainly, but also disputes among household members, signs of theft or other troubles. A thousand small crises emerging in a complex household. She slept with authority, but also authority as burdens. Her rest was punctuated by the need to be available to respond, to keep control even in darkness. The physical space of elite sleeping quarters reflected social status deliberately. Archaeology suggests in larger longhouses, the head of household and spouse might have a slightly more separated sleeping area, not a private room in the modern sense, but perhaps a platform more enclosed, marked by decorative posts or hanging textiles. This separation was both practical and symbolic, showing rank while keeping the longhouse's communal nature. Decoration of these sleeping areas mattered. Carved bed minus post with intricate patterns, hangings with elaborate weaving, display of valuable objects nearby all communicated status. That they also created a particular sleeping environment, one where you were surrounded by symbols of your own wealth and position. Whether this promoted restful sleep or created a different awareness, a consciousness of what you had and might lose, is hard to say. Feasting was central to elite Viking social life, and feasts greatly affected sleep. A wealthy chieftain would host feasts to cement alliances, show generosity, maintain status. These events meant heavy eating and drinking, entertainment, socializing late into the night. The host had to stay alert throughout, ensuring proper hospitality, managing any conflicts, reading social dynamics, responding appropriately. Sleep after a feast would have been affected by alcohol. Vikings brewed Daland mead, drank heartily at gatherings. Alcohol disrupts sleep architecture, reducing rest quality even if it helps falling asleep initially. A chieftain who hosted a successful feast might lie down satisfied with the evening, but have fragmented, unrestful sleep. The next day would bring grogginess and the need to resume normal duties despite not being fully rested. The presence of Lar in wealthy households created another dimension of nighttime experience. These slaves, captured in raids or born into servitude, slept in the same longhouse but in markedly worse conditions. They might get the coldest sleeping spots near the door where drafts were strongest. Their bedding would be minimal, their furs the oldest and least warm. They slept knowing their low status, with no real control over their lives. For masters of Lar, this created a psychological dynamic that must have affected sleep on some level. You slept comfortably knowing others nearby slept poorly. You benefited from their labor by day and their inferior status by night. Whether this caused guilt or simply seemed natural, the way things always were, varied by individual, but it created a particular moral landscape shaping consciousness. The elite also had more to lose, shaping nighttime worries in specific ways. A common farmer whose crops failed might face hardship. A wealthy farmer whose ships were lost at sea could suffer catastrophic loss of wealth and status. Stakes were higher, potential for downward mobility more dramatic and consequential. Anxiety about keeping position, protecting accumulated wealth, ensuring inheritance for children, all this created mental activity that could interfere with deep rest. Trading added another layer of complexity to elite sleep. While not every wealthy Viking went trading, many did, and anticipation of violence shaped consciousness in particular ways. In days before a raid, sleep might be difficult, excitement and fear combining to cause restlessness. During the raid itself, on ships or in temporary camps in hostile territory, sleep would be minimal and hyper-vigilant. On return, laden with plunder or nursing injuries, sleep might be disturbed by the aftermath of violence witnessed and done. Warriors making up a chieftain's retinue lived with particular awareness of mortality. They were expected to be brave, fight when called, value honor over safety. This created a fatalism that might have paradoxically helped sleep. If death could come any time, regardless of precautions, why lose sleep worrying? But it also created psychological effects of living with violence, ways trauma and hyper-vigilance can embed in the nervous system. Saga literature portrays elite Viking sleep in ways reflecting these complexities. There are accounts of prophetic dreams troubling chieftains, sleepless nights before big decisions, restlessness from political power. There are also accounts of warriors sleeping soundly before battle, their fatalism and courage bringing a kind of peace. The elite sleep experience varied and was individual, but carried burdens material comfort didn't fully compensate for. Religious ritual was another area where status shaped sleep. While all Vikings took part in religious observances, the wealthy had special duties. A chieftain might also be a priest minus chieftain conducting rituals and tending sacred sites. This dual role brought extra layers of responsibility and concern. Did sacrifices please the gods? Were rituals done correctly? What did dreams and domens mean for the community's welfare? The OLR often came from or served elite households. Their practices involved altered states, journeys into the spirit world to gather information or insight. A wealthy family might host a VOLVA, provide what she needed for rituals, await her prophecies with mix of hope and apprehension. Such a figure's presence would have created a particular spiritual atmosphere, a heightened awareness of the unseen world and its possible communications. Gender dynamics among the elite were complex, varying by region and period. In some contexts, high-status women wielded considerable power, managing estates, even in rare cases taking part in military leadership. In others, their power was more constrained by male relatives. But regardless of specifics, elite women faced pressures, shaping their consciousness and thus their sleep. They navigated social dynamics, protected family interests, maintained the complex web of relationships keeping their households position. The question of inheritance created particular anxieties that could disturb sleep. Farce inheritance practices varied, but generally sons inherited land and movable property. This meant families with multiple sons faced potential conflict over dividing resources. Fathers might lie awake worrying how to provide for all sons without splitting the farm beyond viability. Mothers worried about daughters' marriage prospects, ensuring they were settled with good men in good circumstances. The wealthy also faced the peculiar burden of hosting. Hospitality was optional in Norse culture. Refusing a traveler shelter and food was a serious breach of social norms. But this meant wealthy households often had guests, sometimes expected, sometimes not. Guests needed housing and feeding. Their presence fitted into the household's rhythms. Heads of wealthy households slept knowing they might be woken to receive travelers, that their generosity was constantly on display and being judged. Trade was another source of both wealth and anxiety for the elite. Those engaged in long-distance trade, sailing to distant ports, exchanging goods across vast distances, could amass significant wealth. But trade was risky. Ships could sink. Goods could be stolen. Markets could shift unpredictably. A merchant lying in his comfortable bed might find his mind running calculations, worrying about ships at sea, wondering if ventures would prove profitable or disastrous. Accumulating wealth itself created specific psychological effects. Archaeology shows wealthy Vikings collected remarkable objects, Arab coins, Byzantine silk, elaborate weapons, intricate jewelry. These weren't just possessions, but status markers, proof of successful voyages, evidence of connections to distant places. But they also needed protecting, guarding against theft, maintained as visible symbols of position. The responsibility of protecting wealth could create its own vigilance. Wealth also meant better access to certain luxuries that might have affected sleep quality. Better food, including more meat and dairy, would have given better nutrition overall. Access to imported goods might have included things eating sleep, finer textiles, softer and warmer, perhaps even rare substances with calming effects. Yet these advantages had to be weighed against stresses for maintaining high status. The elite were also more likely to travel, and travel disrupted normal sleep patterns. A chieftain visiting another household slept in unfamiliar surroundings among people he might not fully trust, and circumstances requiring continued alertness to social dynamics. Traveled even more, sleeping on ships and in foreign ports. The rest always somewhat provisional and guarded. The wealthy thus experienced more variety in sleeping conditions. But this variety came at the cost of the deep security familiarity gives. As the Norse world changed, Christianity spreading, kingdoms forming, traditional structures shifting, the elite were often at the center of these changes. They had to navigate new political arrangements, adopt new religious practices, adjust to new social organization. This process of cultural transformation would have created particular anxieties, especially at night when the mind turns over the day's events and considers an uncertain future. The irony at the heart of elite Viking sleep is that those with the most material comfort often had the least psychological ease. A common farmer, exhausted from physical labor, surrounded by family, with few political entanglements to worry over, might sink into deep, restorative sleep despite rough bedding and cold air. A chieftain in his comfortable bed with fine furs and ample space might lie awake for hours turning over political calculations, worrying about alliances, inheritance, reputation. This paradox suggests something important about sleep itself. It isn't primarily a function of comfort, but of psychological factors like security, predictability, absence of unresolved anxiety. Vikings seem to understand this intuitively, even if they couldn't put it in modern psychological terms. The rituals around sleep, the emphasis on proper protective measures, the value placed on communal closeness, all addressed psychological needs as much as physical ones. The archaeological record of elite graves shows something poignant about how status followed people even into death. Wealthy individuals were buried in ships or elaborate chambers, surrounded by possessions, bodies arranged carefully, graves marked with visible monuments. This care extended even to ensuring the dead would rest properly in the afterlife. The same anxieties about status shaping elite sleep and life continued shaping how they were treated after death. Yet for all the complications and burdens of high status, the elite were still Vikings, still part of the same cultural framework shaping everyone's sleep experience. They believed in the same gods, feared the same Dr. Auguste R., practiced versions of the same protective rituals. Their nights differed in degree, not entirely in kind, from those of poorer neighbors. They too closed eyes in smoky longhouses, listened to wind howling outside, woke in the night to stir the fire, gradually learned the particular rhythms and textures of sleep their culture gave. In the end, the weight of status might have made certain kinds of deep, untroubled sleep harder for the elite to find. They had more responsibilities, more to protect, more complex social dynamics to navigate. But they also had resources to manage challenges, specialists to consult, allies to rely on. They weren't helpless against sleep slins, but actively engaged in managing their rest through whatever means their culture provided. And perhaps on some nights when political worries were distant, the household running smoothly, the fire-warmed family sleeping peacefully nearby, even the elite could find that deep, complete rest all humans crave. Perhaps in those moments, soft furs and fine textiles truly did give extra comfort. The larger space truly did create a sense of security, and while fulfilled its promise of making life easier, those nights, however, might have been rarer than for poorer neighbors, whose exhaustion and simpler lives more reliably delivered them into deep sleep's embrace. Traveled through many nights now, across centuries and circumstances, from common longhouses to Vinland's strange forests, from the realm of dreams and spirits to the complicated beds of chieftains. The journey has revealed something seeming paradoxical. From our modern view, Vikings, living in conditions would find nearly unbearable, often slept more deeply and perhaps more peacefully than many do in the comfort and security of today's world. This isn't to romanticize their lives or suggest hardship is desirable. Vikings suffered in ways we can barely imagine, from cold and hunger, disease and injury, violence and loss. Their lives were short by modern standards, their daily existence filled with labor that would exhaust us. Their world lacked countless comforts and safeties we take for granted. Yet within this harsh frame, they found rest. The key to understanding Viking sleep lies in seeing what actually fosters depressed. It isn't primarily material comfort, though comfort helps. It isn't absence of physical sensation, though pain certainly interferes. Rather, deep sleep seems to need a particular constellation of psychological and physical factors: genuine exhaustion, a sense of relative safety, resolution or acceptance of uncertainty, absence of excessive mental stimulation. Vikings achieved these conditions through the very structure of their lives. Their days were physically demanding to a degree, creating real, profound exhaustion, not mental tiredness from office work, but full-minus body weariness from hours of hard physical labor. This exhaustion wasn't a burden to manage, but a natural result of surviving a demanding environment. When they lay down at night, their bodies demanded rest, and their minds had neither energy nor inclination to resist. The sense of safety they achieved was relative but real. Longhouse walls, though not impermeable, gave shelter from elements and symbolic protection from spiritual threats. The presence of family sleeping nearby satisfied deep evolutionary needs for communal security. Rituals before sleep, touching amulets, banking fires, whispering prayers created psychological comfort, facilitating letting go into unconsciousness. They cowed and control everything, but they done what could be done. Acceptance of uncertainty permeating Norse culture also helped restful sleep. The idea of weird fate that couldn't be avoided meant excessive worry was somewhat pointless. Tomorrow would bring what it would. Gods would do as they pleased. Ships would return or not. This fatalism, which might seem grim to modern sensibilities, actually created a kind of freedom from anxiety. You could plan and prepare, but ultimately had to trust your fate would unfold as meant. Absence of excessive mental stimulation was perhaps most important. Vikings lived in a world without artificial light, without constant information flow, without the barrage of images, sounds, text characterizing modern existence. As dark fell, activity naturally wound down. Conversations by the fire were soothing, not stimulating. Stories were familiar, repeated with variation, not delivering shocking new information every night. The mind was allowed to slow gradually, not jerked from high stimulation straight into trying to sleep. Compare this to the modern sleep environment, where people often try to move directly from bright screens to dark bedrooms, from social media's constant stimulation to expecting immediate unconsciousness. The nervous system gets no chance to down-regulate gradually. The mind, fed exciting or disturbing content until the moment of lying down, keeps processing and worrying even when the body is still. Material comfort gives no compensation for this neurological dissonance. The Kings also benefited from what sleep researchers now call good sleep hygiene without consciously thinking of it. Their sleep-wake cycle was closely tied to natural light, letting circadian rhythms work optimally. They exercised extensively during the day, not in gyms, but through natural movement of labor, promoting deeper sleep. They ate their last meal hours before sleep, letting digestion finish. They slept in cool, dark spaces, helping a body's natural temperature drop during sleep. The social side of Viking sleep stays especially relevant. They never slept truly alone. Family and community were always present, giving both practical security and deep psychological comfort. Modern people often sleep in isolated bedrooms, sometimes in houses where they live alone, a degree of solitude that would have seemed bizarre and frightening to Vikings. The loneliness epidemic of today's world has sleep consequences we're only beginning to fully grasp. Yet we must acknowledge what Vikings lost in their sleep too. They experienced cold would find unbearable, pain would medicate immediately, illnesses easily treated in later times. Their nights held real fears of raids, predators, the unknown, fears grounded in genuine danger, not merely psychological. Their sleep was better in every way, but adapted to their specific circumstances in ways often working surprisingly well. Guru Ur's journey showed how sleep evolved with changing circumstances, how the same person could experience radically different qualities of rest across a lifetime, from communal childhood warmth to disturbed sleep beside an eyeing spouse, from the strange alertness of motherhood in Vinland to the structured rest of monastic life. She adapted repeatedly, finding what rest each life phase allowed. This adaptability itself is a lesson. Sleep isn't a fixed state, but something shifting with circumstances, requiring flexibility and acceptance, not rigid expectations. The mysteries of the Viking unseen world revealed how belief shapes experience, how cultural framework influences the subjective quality of consciousness in darkness. Vikings didn't sleep in absence of meaning, but within a rich symbolic universe, giving interpretation to ambiguous experiences. Their dreams carried significance. Their night sounds had potential meaning. Their darkness was populated with possibilities both threatening and transcendent. Whether this enhanced or disturbed their sleep likely varied by individual and situation, but it created a particular texture of nighttime consciousness differing markedly from modernity's more materialist mindset. Exploring elite sleep taught us comfort and ease don't automatically mean restful sleep. Healthy Vikings had softer beds but harder worries, more space but more responsibility, better food but greater anxiety about losing what they had. This remains true today. Wealth provides resources to address sleep problems, but can't by itself create the psychological conditions facilitating deep rest. The executive in a luxury hotel room may sleep worse than the farmer in a simple cottage if their mind won't quiet. As we end this journey through Viking nights, we might ask what lessons their experience holds for us. Not that we should abandon modern comforts. Few would willingly give up heating, lighting, medicine to live as Vikings did. But perhaps we can recognize some elements of their lifestyle actually help sleep better than aspects of contemporary life. The physical exhaustion from regular movement, the gradual transition from activity to rest as light fades, the presence of close others during sleep, acceptance of uncertainty rather than constant worry about controlling everything. We might also learn from their rituals not the specific content of prayers to Thor and Odin, but the principle of marking the transition to sleep is significant. Creating small ceremonies around bedtime, taking time to wind down, preparing the sleeping space thoughtfully. These practices acknowledge sleep is important, deserves attention and care, not something to rush into while distracted by screens and worries. Vikings lived in a harsh world, but found pockets of warmth and rest within that harshness. They couldn't control weather or prevent illness or ensure safety, but could create rituals and frameworks helping them face uncertainty with some measure of peace. They couldn't make their lives easy, but could make their sleep deep by allowing themselves to fully surrender to exhaustion at the end of demanding days. As you lie here now listening in your own night's dark, perhaps you can take something from their experience. Perhaps you can let go of some unnecessary worry, recognizing as they did that excessive anxiety about tomorrow doesn't actually change tomorrow. Perhaps you can appreciate the warmth and comfort available to you, the security that would have seemed miraculous to them. Perhaps you can allow yourself to be tired, to acknowledge sleep isn't weakness, but a fundamental human need deserving honor. The longhouses are gone now, collapsed back into earth centuries ago. The people who slept in them are dust, voices silent, stories preserved only in saga fragments and artifacts. But the nights, they knew, cold and smoky, filled with family breathing and distant wind. How those nights were real as this night you experience now. They lived, worried, hoped, dreamed, and slept. And in sleeping, despite everything making their lives hard, they often found a depth of rest eluding their comfortable descendants. So, let yourself rest now as Vikings rested. Let the day's weight settle into your muscles. Let your breathing slow and deepen. Let borders between waking and sleeping blur and soften. You are safe this moment, warm enough, sheltered enough, alive enough. Tomorrow's problems will still be there tomorrow, waiting patiently for your attention, unchanged by nighttime worry. For now, there is only this: the dark, your bed's comfort, the quiet moment before consciousness slips away. Vikings knew something perhaps we've forgotten: that sleep is a kind of trust, a surrender to forces beyond our control, an acknowledgement we can't stay vigilant forever. They trusted their longhouse walls, family's presence, their God's protection, and the simple fact that he survived every night before this one. And in that trust, they found rest deep enough to carry them through whatever the next day brought. Let their nights guide you into your own rest. Let their world's cold and smoke and hardship remind you how much you have to be grateful for. And also let their deep sleep born of exhaustion, ritual, and acceptance show you rest is possible even when life is difficult. That peace can be found even when the world outside is harsh, that human capacity for adaptation reaches even the darkest hours. The fire burns low now, as in countless longhouses across the Viking world. Embers glow soft red, giving just enough light to see familiar shapes' outlines, just enough warmth to soften cold's sharp edge. All around in the dark, others are sleeping: those you love, those you know, the vast human family stretching across time and space. You aren't alone in the dark. You never were. Sleep now as Vikings slept deeply, completely, trusting in morning's return. Waves still roll on distant shores. Stars still wheel overhead in ancient patterns. The world keeps turning, indifferent but not hostile, vast but not empty. And you, small and temporary as you are, still have this gift available: the ability to close your eyes, to let go, to rest. The journey through Viking nights is done, but your own night continues, gentle and dark and full of possibility. Let it take you where it will, and let sleep have its way. Vikings knew this surrender well, and they wait for you on waking's other side, in that place where all sleepers of all ages rest together in the shared human experience of letting go, trusting darkness, finding peace. Good night, traveler. Sleep well, and when morning comes, as it always does, may you wake refreshed and ready, as Vikings woke to face another day in the strange, beautiful world we all inhabit together, temporarily.